continue on our discussion with social media and ethics. And we talked a little bit about medium as the message with Marshall McLuhan, talking a little bit about computer-mediated communications, talking a little bit about the epochs of how we've communicated in the past when it comes to mass media, and displacement effects, all of these really awesome things that make up how we're changing communication as we know it based on the type of media that we're using. And again, whether you agree on that or not is kind of up to you. Personally, I think there's validity to both, that the stories haven't changed, it's just the medium, but I also really do emphasize that sometimes the medium has a lot to do with how the story is told. So we've also looked at our consumers, talking about some of the notion of what is a social media audience? How do they respond to things? How can we best adapt? So we shared some examples of some of the good things to do, some of the bad things to do, how you might be able to redeem yourself based on apologia or apologia, however you want to pronounce it. But I want to talk a little bit today about a very interesting subject called the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule basically states that no more than 20% of content related to social media should be considered advertising. So this particular rule, in a sense, basically says let's get away from the banner ads. Let's get away from the quintessential print ads. Let's get away from talking about our company as this grandiose organization that's almost untouchable and you should buy our products. Social media is about achieving this level of compatibility with your consumers. This is really important to consider, where you take in the notion of to take an organization and creating it into an entity, almost like a person, and how a person would talk. And so this is where media and creative collaborate, because as much as it's important to be able to have good scheduling, because as much as it's important to have good tools in terms of where you should advertise and when you should advertise, the creative team comes in to help out and say what we should advertise. And traditionally, our thought would be, let's put a print ad or a video or a sound clip based on what we use. And this is how we've been doing things for years when it comes to traditional media. However, the issue with our media mix when it comes to social media is that we start to say, now we got to change things up in terms of the discourse that we deliver to our client base or our clientele or our consumers. This goes into a little help with our creative team. And you'll notice here's Taylor's 6-segment strategy wheel again. And for those who don't know, I'll just do a real quick run through of it. There's two views and halves of it. So you can almost look at this oak pie, as in one half looks at rational, which again really promotes the idea of good cognitive thinking, really thinking through your purchase positions. These are the 5-star rankings on Amazon. Acute need, you can think of things like spark plugs or toilet paper. Sometimes you don't really think of the brand so much as just the fact that you need it. Versus routine, think of holidays, think of North Carolina when it snows. Beer, bread, and milk go out quicker than anything when there's even a threat of snow that might come our way. So routine is major when it comes to that. Then there's ego, social, and sensory. So this side over here is all based on the claims, rational product focuses, whereas the original views looks at image-based. So ego looks at personal image, in that you are talking about yourself as a personal identity. I identify with this particular brand. People identify with Macs or PCs. I personally identify with Burt's Bees lip balm. I don't know why. It's just the particular one that I enjoy the most in terms of lip balm is concerned anyway. Then there's social, and usually this comes into our social identity where you collaborate with people and like to show off certain things. And you can look at that as products with like the NFL or any kind of sports team, is this sharing of a social identity where, I've had friends that they have agreed with me, or disagreed with me on just about everything, except for the fact that we like the same sports teams. Then there's also the notion of sensory details, which is anything aesthetically pleasing, whether it's to the eye, to your olfactory senses, to any of the five senses could be a particular candidate for this sensory appeal here. So it goes back to the content that we produce that matters. Again, it's not just the where, it's just not the when, it's the what, and also the why. Why do we do the things that we do? So for the why, for social media, be social. And it should be pretty clear. And how can we engage in this discussion? And for a lot of people, this is pretty difficult because we don't want to be in a discussion where we get into talking about something that we shouldn't be talking about. Like, I know a lot of brands get into the notion of posting something when, a anniversary of something happens. So, unfortunately, we had the anniversary of 9/11. And a lot of organizations get into presenting a piece of rhetoric based on their Twitter accounts and trying to join the conversation. And it usually doesn't go as well as they want to. Some people really appreciate it, a lot of people don't. But how do we depict a welcoming attitude in this case? So maybe not inherently promoting ourselves in light of bringing up the notion of the anniversary of a tragedy for something like SpaghettiOs, and I think that was real. I think SpaghettiOs was one of the companies that posted. Personally, I would sit there and say, I'm not really looking for you to post during this time about it. So, the reason that I purchased this product is not because of your stance on certain things. And you remember that you have to think of two things. One is your identity, and two is match. Now, Arby's is an example of very clearly establishing identity on all fronts of their media. So if you watch their TV commercials, they have this person with a very deep voice, and he's talking about all the sandwiches that, the We Have the Meats campaign. It's very, very creative. It's very interesting. It makes for good television, good radio. But the funny thing is, when they get into social media, they take on a completely different role. They understand that although they can promote a similar campaign, they also can promote it in such a way that looks at different audiences all at once. Now, I know I told you to really focus on one buyer persona, and you should. No, excuse me. One universe, not one buyer persona, but many buyer personas within a universe. Arby's is I think it's an international company. If nothing else, it's a national company. And so they can approach it in a lot of different ways, just because they have this opportunity to reach multiple publics and multiple universes. So to give an example, I show you the one down here for nerds and niches, and I don't have any problem saying nerds and niches because I am a nerd, and most of the stuff of the humor that's related into their Arby's accounts really appeals to me, and I find it really funny. So again, we talked about their rough and tough demeanor when it comes on traditional media. However, on their Facebook page, for example, you'll notice that if you're a purveyor of video games or 90s television or movies, you can see that they use their cardboard as a way to create intricate art designs. So I'll pick our little Nightmare on Elm Street here, hopefully. You'll notice here, again, tons of, one of my friends even liked it, 91,000 likes, 16,000 shares, 3.9 thousand comments. I mean, Granted, this is one of those things where really done well in terms of exposing to identity here. And we notice, going back to talking about match as well as identity, the identity was already established that here in Arby's we're going to approach this nerd humor of promoting funny things, of homages to great film, great video games, great television, and we're going to make it so it's going to be that niche base. And it works. But the other thing is they found a way to make it match. So both of these have to work together, in identity and match. And match works really well in this case because Arby's decided we are going to make our cardboard a symbol of art pieces. I was going to say pizzas there for a second. They also use marinara sauce. They also use ketchup. Again, the whole thing that they do is absolutely crazy in terms of the things that they do. I'm looking at a bunch of them and laughing myself of some of that. Hey, this is where I got my doctorate in using ketchup here for Fargo, the television show or the movie. And again, not as many, but 21,000 responses on this it's very creative in terms of how this is presented here. So again, really well done media execution by Arby's in this case. And but what about smaller brands? I'm showing them this multi-million-dollar corporation that we're dealing with, and I keep talking about the small company big shadow theorem here. It's not really a represented theorem. It's just something I like to call it. And I look at the example of the fine folks at Drecker Brewing Company, which is where I just showed, was in Fargo, North Dakota. They always show these pictures of beer and how much things look really good, but they also have these social components. You'll notice here that they have all these trivia events. They have Viking yoga. They really like to mix everything with a Viking tradition, as they've got their logo right here. I've always loved their logo, even though traditionally speaking, Vikings didn't have horns. I mentioned that to them. They didn't really care. But they mention, again, so much stuff here, so much trivia, but they also have Oktoberfests. They also have vinyl nights, which are kind of cool. And I'm sure they're not doing it right now, but they have what are called bags tournaments, which we call them in the Midwest. But you can also look at them as cornhole, for instance. They do podcast, movie screenings, just basically a lot of fun stuff. Plus beer, those are two good things, being able to enjoy yourself and having a beer while you do it. So, again, if you're ever curious about this kind of thing in terms of identity and match, brewing companies are very, very good as aspirational material, as I know a couple of you have decided to choose a brewery as your organization, which you might already realize that your social media is really good. I'm making an assumption, but again, looking at other breweries and how they're doing things and how they're doing events is a big thing to do there. And the last thing is kind of an in-between area. So we note the Arby's commercials in terms of a multi-million-dollar corporation versus, and it may be larger than that, versus a very small distributed company within Fargo, North Dakota, and Moorhead, Minnesota, right on the borderline there. But let's look at something that's kind of small in terms of the audience view, but large in terms of the breadth. So it doesn't have a lot of, let me back up. It doesn't have a lot of viewers, but the people that do view them are very in tune with this. And I'm talking about Twitch TV. Now, Twitch TV is a very interesting specimen to talk about here, mainly because it is one of the lowest numbers for a major website for unique users. And those unique users are anybody that sends out a request to view your website. So anytime you type in a facebook.com, in this case, twitch.tv, it sends a message to say, hey, I want to request to view your site. And so Twitch TV has a lot of low numbers of unique users, but its index numbers, on the other hand, are incredible. They're somewhere in the 500s. And if you remember our discussion last week about index numbers, 100 and better is usually a pretty good indicator that this is a medium worthwhile to use. And so Twitch, although they don't have the same numbers as a lot of different social media websites, what they do have is a major international following all over the world of people who really care about what's being published on here. And in this case, it's video games. Twitch TV does a lot of work in video game related material. As you can see over here is an event called Games Done Quick. And Games Done Quick is done twice a year. I may have mentioned this already. It's done twice a year. It's a really cool event where gamers from all over the world start to speed race games. Here's an example down here of what it looks like. This one in particular was, they'll play a lot of the popular games like, your Super Marios, as well as your Sonic the Hedgehogs, the really old school and very popular video game franchises. But they'll also do these kind of goofy games that are within their own niche, and this one was a Japanese-only release called Pepsi Man. You really should look at the video here, especially for the gentleman, I don't know if you'd be able to see that, sitting on the couch, who is dressed like the person on the superhero called Pepsi Man. So this all sounds really stupid, in that you're talking about video games as almost a sport, and video games as a means to advertise. But what's not really realized in terms of what GDQ does is, one, they raise, I think last year was $3.5 million for the symbol over here, which is called Doctors Without Borders, a really interesting non-government organization based on, doctors that travel all over the world and try to help underprivileged countries in terms of medicine, and it's a really cool program. But again, they raised $3.5 million, and they own these twice a year. It's a week long. It's all day. When I say all day and all night, well, I mean all day. It's 24 hours for 7 days a week for 1 week. And again, it's really cool. So they first and foremost do a lot of excellence in scheduling. So it's not too saturated that we're continuously plugging in games all the time. So again, the fact that it's twice a year makes it an event. It gets people to go down there and hang out with their buddies. This is, for some people, like their Super Bowl or their World Cup, where people will say, this is my day. They'll take off work. The comments are absolutely fascinating about what people do. And so it's really interesting in that index numbers. It's excellence in scheduling. They do an outstanding job in identifying with NGOs. So your non-government organization with Doctors Without Borders. And this is how it got started. So, it started off in some dude's house where a bunch of his friends came by and started playing video games and speed running. And once the internet really started taking off with social media, and more specifically broadcasting live streams of what they were doing, they started to do some unorthodox things in terms of incredible and seamless advertising. But they paired really well with this Doctors Without Borders, even when they were by themselves in, the house. Now it's at a hotel ballroom with millions of people watching and millions donated. So again, but they've identified themselves with their NGO very, very early. And that's key when it comes to being able to promote your brand, is identifying with those non-government organizations early versus later. And I do bring up the notion of Pepsi Man here just because it was just so wacky and goofy what they were doing here. But Pepsi started trending on Twitter. And if I'm Pepsi, I'm like, boy, that is free, awesome advertising that I'm getting based on this event. And some of the organizations really take note of that, and they donate incredible amounts of money to the cause. So a t-shirt company called the Yeti, so not the Yeti, the cooler company, but I think it's YETEE, and they make nerdy t-shirts of famous TV shows and video games and so forth. But they donate a lot of money to this cause, but they also gain it back in exposure. So it's a really intricate but interesting system here. So the last one is talking about ethics. This is great for the advertiser in terms of what we're doing, but for what? For the consumer. So the issues that we're facing here is that most people feel unsafe with personal information. So we talked about the trash can that could locate your identity of where you are. A lot of people are, a small amount try to hide their digital footprint. Not a lot of people feel comfortable sharing their location. A lot of people don't share data. So there's all these issues of percentages and people not wanting to really create a digital footprint and make themselves known around the media landscape. But there is also the notion of inauthenticity, of people selling like they would traditionally sell. And this is one of the things that creative strategists try to move away from, and that the media planners should too, just because, again, the index numbers the unique viewers and the impressions are outstanding. But if you've got a more interested, invested audience, this can be a major issue in terms of inauthenticity. And again, that goes with stop selling me something. Be social in this case. Always check your hashtag if you're going to use a hashtag. So a lot of you have been talking about using social media. Make sure that you don't make haste of your post. If you think of a certain post and a certain hashtag, check to see if there's ever any ground made with it, and if there's ever been any interesting commentary based on the hashtag. So you don't want to put yourself in a trap. Problems with data acquired. You can use consumer data, but we should always know about it. We should know as an audience how our data is being distributed. Anytime that you're doing a survey, for example, you always want to have that right to opt out of a survey or a focus groups. And the same thing here. You don't have to participate, but we want you to be there. London recycling, we've already talked about that. So how do we resolve this? And I'll go back to the ethics here. First and foremost, always be truthful and always be transparent. Make sure you're very well known to your particular viewers. Create ads specifically for your consumer likes. Again, think of the Arby's examples for this. Reporting results ethically. This, again, promotes into what we talked about in terms of pomegranate advertising or cranberry advertising of health claims. And again, pharmaceutical companies is a good example of that. Always report those results ethically. Make sure you're relatable. Make sure that you interact well with your clients, that you have good social interaction, and thus being able to create some kind of parasocial relationship, identity, and as you see on there, match. Make sure your product matches with the social media landscape. And then understanding reach on social media. CSR posts are typically, corporate social responsibility are typically successful. Again, this is why Twitch is doing so well. It's because they've invented themselves as an organization that really cares and gives back. And the last thing I'll mention is that diffusion can work with you or against you. There were a lot of cool examples of how diffusion works in many good ways. But, for example, I picked up a book on diffusions of innovations not too long ago, and I read one of the first chapters that was talking about keyboards. And they mentioned that the keyboard that's one we use today, it's called QWERTY, QWERTY. And you'll notice it's pretty easy to look at because if you look at the top row, That's how it reads, is QWERTY. But you may not know this about this particular keyboard, is that it was actually designed to help typewriters type slower because of fear that the hammers on the keys would get jammed, and they often did. They got jammed together as a lot of the keyboards were typed too tight together. But this keyboard really took off, and so it's what we use now, even though there is another keyboard that was invented called the Dvorak keyboard, and it beats every speed test of typing against a QWERTY computer. It always wins. But the fact is, the diffusion in this case caught on to the QWERTY keyboard, and it never took off for the Dvorak, and this is one of the reasons why we use a keyboard that is intentionally meant for you to type slow. And I can go into that tomorrow if you're really interested in it. You might not care on this case, but it's still very interesting in my opinion. And they've got some interesting implications in terms of how things can take off, how things can make a major setback, how things can take off in the wrong direction. These are all areas that need to be addressed when it comes to being able to have a presence on social media. So that's all for today. I hope you all have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow about Media Flight Plan examples 3 and 4. All right, thanks everybody.